right, why don't we get things rolling here? Good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Zagorski. I'm CEO of Double Verify. It's great to be here today in the virtual meeting room. I'd like to start to welcome everybody to our 2021 Global Insights Report webinar. As you may know, DV's mission is to make the advertising ecosystem stronger, safer, and more secure. And a big part of that is making an ecosystem that's more transparency. And in a drive to do that and bring more transparency and thought leadership to the space, we'd love to present our Global Insights Report. Our Global Insights Report is really a document that helps provide advertisers in-depth market by market analysis that covers every place where DV is. That's North America, LATAM, EMEA, APAC. And its goal is really to help inform digital advertising strategies. It's the 5th year that we've published the report, and it's getting more and more robust every year. This year, our analytics team, headed by Colette Spagnolo, our Senior Director of Marketing Analytics, who's with us today, looked at media quality and performance from more than 1 trillion impressions. It's a huge number of transactions that we looked at, delivered in 80 markets across 2,100 brands. Today's focus is on the Americas region, which we cover 14 countries in Latin America, Canada, and of course, the US. Colette's going to take us through the findings from the report with some specific insights from the APAC, from the Americas region. And this short presentation is going to be followed by a lively fireside chat because, it's only 90 degrees out. So let's have a fireside chat that will also be moderated by Colette. For the fireside chat, we are really lucky today to have some great industry leaders and experts. Lisa Giacosa, who's president and global head of data technology, analytics, and insights at Spark Foundry, joins us, as well as Orchid Richardson, who's the SVP of Programmatic and the Data Center at the IAB. And let me tell you a little bit about each one of those. Lisa, who's president, global head of data, tech, analytics, and insights at Spark, is responsible for developing innovative solutions that leverage data, analytics, and insights to build experiences that drive business outcomes for digital advertisers. She is also passionate about humanizing data to better understand consumer behavior for improved efficiency. And she is a killer lip gloss leader, as we like to say. If you don't call out her lip gloss in this webinar, then you're not doing the right thing. So she's bringing a real aggressive lip gloss game today. Orchid Richardson, who's the SVP of Programmatic Data Center at IAB, has immense expertise in managing complex data systems and audience exchanges, and has a deep appreciation for the complexities involved in today's big data landscape. Her insights and guidance help advance data operations and best practices, increasing the value of digital marketing for all parties involved. In other words, Orchid makes it happen with data. And that's key to everything that we're talking about here today. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Colette to dig us into some of the findings of the Global Insights Report.
Great. Thanks, Mark. As a reminder for all the audience, you can ask questions in the Q&A box in the Zoom chat throughout the session. And we do have some time set aside at the end for Q&A. So by all means, please submit any questions that you have. But let's jump into the report itself. So before we review America's trends, let's take a look first at the global state of quality over the past 12 months. Now, overall, we've found that many post-bid quality metrics measured and benchmarked by Double Verify are moving in a positive direction, with violation rates decreasing. And you can see that on the left-hand side of the screen. Both brand suitability and fraud violations are down globally. And this demonstrates the impact that verification technologies have on cleaning up the supply chain. Now, on that note, it's especially important in North America to note that all these figures are post-bid. So open marketplace numbers that have not gone through pre-bid avoidance technology are certainly higher. And in fact, brands increasing the implementation of that very pre-bid avoidance is central to this positive shift in lower post-bid violation rates. But it is not just brand suitability and fraud violations that are improving. Globally, viewability is up, driven not only by mature markets such as North America, but also throughout emerging markets via improvements year over year. And as you'll see in the upcoming slides, LATAM is now more generally aligning closely with North America across these quality metrics. A really important underlying driver of improvement has been a convergence of programmatic and publisher quality. For years, the industry has been saying that programmatic advertising has matured, and you can see that with spend being up across programmatic. But programmatic maturity is not just reflected in spend or in reach. For the first time ever, DV's fraud and brand suitability violation rates for both programmatic and publisher buys came within 1% of each other. And just a year ago, programmatic brand suitability rates were 15% higher for brand suitability, and fraud was 5% higher than publisher direct. Additionally, viewable rates are also comparable across programmatic and publisher direct buys now. So why is this happening? Well, programmatic and publisher buys used to be strongly delineated. Programmatic meant buying real-time bidding through the open exchange, and publisher direct meant filling out insertion orders with each publisher on your media plan. But today, private marketplaces and programmatic guaranteed deals add flexibility to buys, and that blurs the line between programmatic and publisher direct. So it's possible now, right, to buy from publishers programmatically. And therefore, it's not surprising that as the line blurs, the quality is converging as well. Also, as programmatic continues to grow as the dominant buying modality, global advertisers increasingly are activating pre-bid controls. So they're benefiting from protection before ads are even purchased. And that circumvents post-bid violations. And of course, platforms such as DSPs and SSPs have worked diligently with the verification industry to improve inventory quality at large. Now we're seeing really big changes in video specifically. So mobile web video volume more than doubled year over year, and CTV has emerged as the top driver of DV video impressions in North America across all of our device types. One of the biggest trends worth noting here is, of course, the shift in content consumption. During the pandemic, people began increasing the time they spent online, and in particular, the time they spent streaming content. Not only are more people streaming content, though, we're also now better able to measure video content. Now, across mobile, the Open Measurement Initiative with the IAB has improved measurability. Historically, video has been pretty difficult to measure within mobile apps. Strong adoption of the Open Measurement SDK, Software Development Kit, has helped gradually reverse this trend, though. And as of Q1 of this year, DV saw over 100,000 open measurement enabled apps. Now, the share of video impressions that supported viewability measurement increased about 10% year on year. So greater adoption has led to better measurability. In CTV, measurement is more challenging, but we have taken strides to ensure that the DoubleVerify tag can be used to measure impressions on CTV by working really closely with leading CTV platforms. And CTV is now an established channel in US markets. In fact, 1/3 of video impressions in the US are now delivered on CTV devices. However, as I just mentioned, measurement standards on CTV are yet to be established. And as a result, verification solutions for the channel differ from those available across other media. And brand suitability in particular is still really nascent on the platform. A lot of CTV is premium inventory, and that can often lead advertisers to think that because the inventory is premium, it is safe. But that's not entirely true. Some CTV apps, like certain adult content apps, are going to be broadly unsafe for most or all advertisers. And then there are other apps that could be okay for one advertiser and not okay for another. So this year, DoubleVerify rolled out inclusion and exclusion lists for CTV apps, and that allows advertisers to measure whether their actual placements match their media plans. Now, in general, we tend to see that bigger advertisers are earlier adopters of brand safety and suitability tools. And this is certainly true of our largest advertisers, who are champions of CTV brand suitability in particular. In fact, our top 75 clients are 4 times more likely to have adopted inclusion and exclusion lists than other advertisers. And very, very shortly, DV will be rolling out additional app-level enhancements, which allow advertisers to precisely control how they target and avoid CTV apps. Zooming out of CTV and taking a look at brand safety as a whole across the Americas, we can see that over time, violation rate trends are heading in the right direction after a big spike from 2019 to 2020. To understand why these rates are normalizing now, I think it's helpful to first understand why they rose in 2020, which was a transformative year, of course, in many ways, not the least of which was the coronavirus pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, many advertisers responded by broadly blocking any content they felt could be potentially unsafe or unsuitable. And we can see this reflected in the jump in brand suitability violations from 19 to 20, which are particularly steep in LATAM on the right. At the start of the pandemic, though, DV reached out to advertisers with best practices to help them strike the right protection between balance and scale with a sophisticated and nuanced brand suitability toolkit. We can see the impact that education efforts had on both LATAM and North America. In LATAM, which is more of an emerging market, the adoption of new brand suitability tools caused 2021 violation rates to fall by 26%. In North America, where more of these tools were already in use, violation rates still fell by 6% from 2020 to 2021. But North America is not only the most established digital market, it's also the largest. And that makes it more difficult to move as a market. So a 6% decrease in North America is actually a pretty meaningful decline. And North America in particular is now close to its 2019 brand suitability levels. And although LATAM is not quite there yet, the steep year-over-year decline does show that it's working to close that gap. And again, we expect that LATAM will take longer to return to those pre-COVID levels because the market experienced a more dramatic jump from 2019 to 2020 to begin with. Now, education and enhanced brand safety and suitability tools, including preventative tools like DV's authentic brand safety targeting, make a difference in keeping brand suitability violations low. In fact, there's actually a direct correlation between an increased adoption of authentic brand safety targeting, which aligns pre-bid and post-bid brand safety and suitability settings, and a decrease in programmatic block rates. And that demonstrates how adoption drives campaign efficiency and effectiveness. Moving on to fraud, although North America leads the pack when it comes to lowering brand suitability violations, it's actually above the 1.4% global benchmark for, again, post-bid fraud. LATAM, on the other hand, is below this benchmark, but both regions, established and emerging, saw very similar year-over-year decreases in post-bid fraud. And when we look at the 3-year trend, we can see that post-bid fraud has been on a sustained decline. And the decline shows the impact, again, of pre-bid fraud avoidance and protection. But while rates are down overall, the volume of fraud and sophisticated invalid traffic, or SIVT, has remained constant and is targeting inventory that's high profile and high value. For example, one of the reasons that CTV's average fraud rate is so low is increased protection. Each day, the DV Fraud Lab analyzes over 2 billion impressions, and we send 100 daily updates to our DSP partners with new fraud signatures. And one area of particular focus over the last year is CTV, where we identified and neutralized a family of fraud schemes that we call Octobot. Now, Octobot targeted CTV and mobile apps specifically and began operating in November of 2019. And as our DV Fraud Lab would shut down one arm, another would emerge. So remaining vigilant in identifying and shutting down these emerging schemes helps to ensure our clients stay protected wherever they are buying media. LATAM's also seeing bigger improvements in viewability rates than North America, with 9% and 12% increases across display and video respectively. And LATAM is now meeting the IAB viewability thresholds for 70% for both. Now, although North America is moving in the right direction, the region clocks in with 67% display viewable and 69% video viewable, both below that 70% threshold. But viewable rates on their own can be a little misleading. So DV pioneered the authentic ad, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, an MRC accredited metric in 2015. To be considered authentic, an ad must be viewable, free of fraud, served in a brand safe and suitable environment, and in the intended geo. So it's really important never to look at quality in a silo where metrics might be separate from each other. And when we work with larger brands, they often use the authentic ad as their currency for quality. The 70% IAB threshold should not only be for viewable ads, 70% should be the threshold for authentic ads. If you don't have quality across all metrics, you're potentially paying for lower quality media. And having a strong baseline of quality puts you in a better position to achieve performance KPIs, whether that's on branding or direct response campaigns. Now, both LATAM and North America, in good news, have seen improvements in authentic rates, but neither is at that 70% threshold yet. Importantly, though, LATAM is actually slightly ahead of North America now when it comes to authentic rates. So let's pull this all together. For the first year ever, we saw quality in each region, APAC, EMEA, LATAM, and North America, improve. But the biggest improvements were seen in APAC and LATAM, which is a clear reversal from last year's Global Insights report. But it was an expected trend while we've watched these regions mature. As emerging markets grow in their understanding and adoption of tools across brand suitability, fraud, and viewability, we see that their rates are starting to align with the levels seen in more mature markets. This is fueled by industry education about best practices such as pre-bid avoidance, and that drives improvement around the globe. Establishing that baseline of quality will help ensure that advertisers have the ability to see what drives performance, and it ensures that you're spending your media dollars in the most efficient and effective way. Now, I'm going to stop talking and we can get into our fireside chat with Lisa, Orchid, and Mark. Just want to call out, we'll also be launching some polls throughout the fireside chat and reviewing the results live, so keep an eye out for those. Okay, let's start by calling back to some of those more macro level trends and look at the overall ad verification landscape in the Americas. Mark, I'll start with you. At a very high level, it looks like quality is really improving. Can you give us some additional insight into why this may be?
Yeah, thanks, Colette. I mean, I think I could broadly, bucket this into two main drivers of increase in quality. The first is just the broad expansion of verification solutions across the supply ecosystem, right? So as we engage more with suppliers and engage more, integrations into the supply ecosystem, we're able to kind of clean up a lot of what goes into the supply chain before it even reaches advertisers. So I think that's the first aspect of this. I think the second is the increased, and you mentioned this, the increased adoption of pre-bid filtering. We've seen a direct correlation with the implementation of pre-bid filtering and the decreases in the percentage of IVT violations on the post-bid side. It just makes sense, right? So as programmatic continues to not only take the lion's share, but really be the de facto way in which almost all inventory is being bought, as we use more filters and more pre-bid filters, I think we're going to see a general decline in the percentage of impressions that on the post-bid side actually are considered invalid. I would want to again put an asterisk here when we say this is overall a percentage decline. There is still a heck of a lot of fraud going on out there, and we're analyzing more implementations of pre-bid are going in there, but that doesn't mean there still aren't a lot of violations happening on a number basis, and we are definitely leaning into that as a company, and I think as an industry too.
Yeah, and of course we're looking at more of a skewed sample size anyway, because our clients are what we're measuring, right? And of course, whatever you measure will improve over time anyway. Let's talk about CTV, because that's obviously the most pressing topic of the day. So as I mentioned earlier, about 1/3 of all DV's measured video ad impressions are now served on connected TV devices in North America. So that makes CTV the leading driver of the region's verified impressions. So Lisa, I'll ask you, are you seeing more of your clients demanding verification specifically on CTV? And is that more around fraud or also brand safety and viewability as well?
So the answer is yes. And the reason is of course, streaming behavior since COVID, it's been a game changer. It's been a massive catalyst to drive digital transformation in every audience, whether that's, younger audiences right the way through those older audiences that have shifted their behavior to streaming more. And with that comes, of course, when there's a seemingly endless inventory out there, of course, the fraudsters go where the inventory is and where the money is, right? And the second that I see I see that there's limitless inventory, I get a red flag in my mind that fraud might be at play, right? Because we know that there's only a certain number of people and a certain number of content areas out there. So when it comes to my first red flag, it is fraud. It's making sure that we are, looking at, are we actually buying real inventory? And then, of course, it comes back to what you were talking about, your authentic measure, in terms of we have to tick all of those boxes for us to be happy with what our clients are buying. We have to make sure that it is authentic and of quality as well. So that means looking at not only fraud, but of course, as you say, also brand suitability and brand favorability. So it's all of the above. But the principal first thing is if it's fraudulent, then the other things don't matter, because it's not real inventory, and we're wasting every dollar, and we like to invest every dollar versus spend it.
Yeah, on that note, Mark, can you talk a little bit to how CTV verification has evolved, since especially measurement on this nascent medium has been challenging in the past?
Yeah, Lisa made some great points, about the dynamic between supply and demand has, is really different in CTV, right? When it's a environment in which there's a ton of demand, right? And truly limited supply that's quality supply. So anytime we start seeing that dynamic, there's going to be a lot of people who are saying, wow, I can take advantage of this. I'm in my son's room right now. That's why it's all blurry. But if you remember, do you remember fidget spinners? Kids wanted those like crazy, right? It was insane. There was we need spot. So what happens? All of a sudden, all kind of bootleg fidget spinners that barely spun around, were on the market, right? A lot of junk came in, and we see that in CTV, right? So the challenge here was that CTV started off as a black box universe, right? There was a genuine lack of transparency, and like any system, whether it's DVs or other verification systems, we're only as good as the data we have access to, and we're able to. So over time, the partners in the ecosystem, whether it was Roku or Hulu or Amazon or any of the systems that are managing a lot of CTV inventory, really came to realize that it was a benefit to them to work with companies like DV to help ensure that they're seen as the go-to for safe inventory. So we leaned into direct integrations with platforms like that. We built things like the DV video Omni tag, right? A VAST tag that allowed us to capture data at scale. And as we look at the new challenges, and I think a lot of that has allowed us to kind of get those first barriers down to CTV reluctance, which was kind of, am I buying into fraud? And is what I'm doing, giving me valid inventory? I think the next areas where we really need to start leaning into are brand safety, brand suitability, some of those areas that are still not super transparent in CTV. But I think, based on the relationships that we have, we think those are going to be, newly opened up areas that will drive greater confidence in CTV moving ahead.
Yeah, so Lisa and Mark both touched on the increased volume in programmatic for CTV. Orchid, what implications do you think that will have on quality and measurement standards specifically across the industry?
I read that, I was on mute. So I really think that the increased volume puts pressure on the ecosystem to get quality and measurement standards right. And that really starts with leveraging better how things like IAB Text Lab's context taxonomy is working. And we have to also make sure that brands are actively participating in that conversation, because ultimately, if we get it wrong, it affects them, right? And it affects their spends and dollars. I think we also need to work to eliminate a lot of the fragmentation that exists in the marketplace. So when you look at how, particularly around CTV, how companies will report out viewability, types of shows, episodic information, how all that gets passed to, it's completely different. And granted, a lot of that work needs to start with addressing the legal and contractual obligations that prevent a lot of the publishers from sharing that information. So I definitely think there's work that needs to be done, and it really puts the pressure on us to get it right.
I said it better myself. Let's talk brand safety and suitability, and we're launching our first poll here for the audience. And it's about how you've had to pivot your brand safety and suitability strategy during the last year. So as you guys are answering that, let's get into the conversation. So not only does North America have the lowest brand suitability violation rate, but as I reviewed earlier, the region's continuing to improve with a 6% year-over-year decrease. And LATAM has the second highest brand suitability violation rate, but with a decrease of 26% year-over-year. As we reviewed, the region is certainly on the right track. So Mark, let's talk definitions here. What is the difference between brand safety and suitability, and why is that important?
Yeah, so think of, brand safety is creating that minimum bar of content in which no legitimate advertiser would want to be around. So these are things like pornography or terrorism. Basically content that is just a no-go for, multiple reasons. I always like to think of that as kind of, the meat cleaver, right? We're using that we want to chop this off. We want that nowhere to be near us. Brand suitability is a little bit more nuanced. Think of it as the scalpel, right? We want to get in there and we want to choose the things that are really aligned with who we are as a brand. And that's unique and specific to every different brand that's out there. So, if there's a whole bunch of stories about allergies, right? It's big allergy season. That might be, a no-go for, companies that are selling gardening supplies or plants, right? Like, you don't want to be like, hey, let's have gardening supplies right next to allergy contents. That's just not a good fit. It's not horrible. It's not unbrand safe, but just not suitable. But for a home furnishings company, it could be totally fine, right? It's allergy content, it's fine. People are reading that. So I think, suitability is definitely the next level of, marketers who are sophisticated looking at what content really aligns with who they are as a company. Not only what will perform best, but what matches their brand, what matches their voice, what matches the creative that they're coming out with. And I think that's where, companies like Spark and other agencies shine, right? It's like, hey, this is what we love to do. We love the art of this, right? We've got the science. This is the science. Hack it off. And that's the mechanics of it. But let's get into the art of who brands are. And I think that's what brand suitability is all about. And that's why making sure that systems that you're using have relatively sophisticated approaches to brand suitability, have really defined yet finite, small brand suitability criteria that separates one area to the next is really important, because it is an art. You don't paint in red, blue, and yellow, right? You paint in with the mixtures of all of those colors. So having really, really fine variations between categories in a suitability, I think, is really important.
Yeah. So Lisa, clearly we at DV make a clear distinction between brand safety and suitability. Are brands making that distinction as they work through their media strategies? And how does that impact their campaigns if they are making that distinction?
Yeah, well, certainly for us at Spark Foundry, we do make that distinction, because I think of it rather like a little bit like Mark does, in terms of, for me, brand safety is the table stakes. It's the hygiene factor. And so when I think about brand safety, I think about compliance. So am I breaking any rules? Am I thinking about, if I'm in a finance category, is it fair lending compliant? And so that's where it's, and is it actually a safe environment from a point of view of all the different types of content that Mark talked about? Then the more precise nature of brand suitability gets me to a very different space. It's still about whether it's appropriate for my brand, but it's more thinking about, do I have a right to play? am I happy with the brand association with the context and content in which I'm playing? And do I feel like, that's going to build trust for my brand? Is it going to make people believe that my brand is playing in the right spaces? And what's the impact it's going to have on my brand? So there's multiple different ways to think about it from the point of view of the broader safety compliance aspect, and then the suitability is around that brand association, brand trust, brand reputation, if you like. When I think about it from a point of view of how does it impact their campaigns, one of the things that we do need to be very mindful of is as we layer on more and more tech onto our campaigns, is the cost and then the efficiency of the campaign. Now, normally, when I think about layering on a cost of technology to understand that I'm delivering in a compliant and brand safe and brand suitable manner, that pays dividends because it means that the quality is higher. And in general, when I see higher quality, I see better return on investment, I see better brand metrics, and I also critically see better performance metrics as well, because I'm ensuring that I'm in that quality environment.
Yeah, so Orchid, how is the industry kind of helping to combine those paint colors that Mark was just talking about, right, and get into those nuances? And particularly would love to hear your thoughts on the GARM and 4A's brand safety floor and suitability framework and how that's going to impact the media landscape moving forward.
Yeah, so I'm happy to share that. So for those in the audience who don't know what GARM is, it stands for the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. And they've done some really great foundational work on identifying how to set up sensitive categories so that it creates transparency for both buyers and sellers and how they're interacting. And I think they've been very successful in it. In terms of getting that done and really moving the conversations forward. And most people are using those standards to incorporate into their technology and standards and how they go to market. I think as the media landscape continues to grow, really GARM has the opportunity to expand categorization. So what they are missing, or where the opportunity is really around social, cultural, possibly even looking at how sentiment impacts brand suitability and whether or not you want to be associated with that content. And all of that helps to just drive transparency in the ecosystem and makes it better for brands to be able to go to market.
Great. So I'm going to share the results of the poll here before my question to you, Lisa, because I think it's relevant. So we can see that 38% of respondents said that they have had to significantly pivot their brand safety and suitability strategy, and another 44% they've had to moderately shift. So clearly the last year has had an outsized impact on the strategy that brands are taking. On that, what are some of
just to note though, 6% of people are not applying brand safety or suitability controls. They either need Spark to get in there and work with them, or spend some time with the IAB or double verify. Because if you're not using brand safety on your campaigns, then you either do not care about your brand at all, or have a team that is could probably use a refresh.
Fair enough. So Lisa, what are some of the challenges that marketers are facing when it comes to applying brand safety and suitability, especially when it comes to more multi-channel buys?
I think, first of all, yes, Mark, yes, and that's scary to me that there's 6% of people, particularly in a targeted call and conversation like this, that aren't taking brand safety as a kind of table stake hygiene factor. So that scares me a little, unless you have a uniform brand that's doesn't matter. But I can't think of a brand off the top of my head that wouldn't care. I think from my perspective, it comes back to that standardization, having one metric and one source of truth across all channels so that everything's held to the same standard. So that starts to be part of the challenge is getting to one metric and one counting methodology and one look at the quality of that source of truth. I think also I referenced it kind of before as well, is that making sure that it's not cost prohibitive to enter the market and put these areas and these compliance metrics in place. And then finally, I think one of the biggest challenges is when it comes to thinking about across multiple channels, how you can scrape the content, how you can understand the context and the viability of each piece of content. So it's not necessarily a particular program or a particular type of presenter in that content. It could well be that it's just a particular part of the content on a given day. And so for me, it's how do we start to think about, not making sure that we don't categorize things in one go, but we do continually optimize and think about how that looks in terms of the context of the characters, the people, the content, and then overall what that looks like in terms of a brand environment.
Yeah, and we'll touch on exact context in a little bit, but first we're going to move on to fraud and sophisticated invalid traffic. So as I reviewed earlier, fraud and SIVT violation rates decreased by 30% year over year. And at 1.5%, North America is above the global benchmark. And in LATAM, fraud rates decreased by 29% year over year. And now LATAM is the second lowest rate out of all of our regions at 1.1%. So Mark, can you speak to why we're beginning to see a decline in fraud?
Yeah, I mean, look, I won't belabor this. I think we mentioned this before. I think it's the fact that there has been a great amount of platform adoption of verification tools to help clean up the supply chain, as well as the increased expansion and use of pre-bid filtering. I think we see pre-bid filtering kind of sucking the air out of the ability of fraudsters to kind of make money off fraud, right? And I think that's the thing. If we get down to the bottom of this, is that shining a light on crime makes it harder to do. And once it's harder to do, it's no longer profitable, right? If it's easy to commit a crime, people will do it. If it gets harder and harder, then people look for other things to go after. So I think it's a combination of shining a light, right? Creating a greater focus on verification through platforms, and the fact that we're actually filtering it out, in the pre-bid notion. Still doesn't mean that it's gone. It still means there's a problem out there. And it's very funny. When we publish this report, I have to use an anecdote. You can never please anybody, right? So there are people who say, oh, the verification companies, all you do is create a lot of, concern about fraud and pain and suffering to help your business, right? And then when we say fraud goes down, I saw someone had tweeted, I like my fraud companies to find more fraud, not less. So I look, I guess, we're damned if we find more fraud. We're damned if we don't find fraud. I think it's good that we're seeing the percentage of impressions that are fraudulent go down within our ecosystem. It means the things that we're doing is working. And I think that's good for the industry.
Yeah, and on industry initiatives, Orchid, can you talk through some overall kind of cross-industry initiatives being undertaken specifically by the IAB or across the whole industry to help combat ad fraud? And I would love to hear your thoughts also on what impact do you think individual advertisers and publishers can actually have on keeping the larger ecosystem free of these bad actors?
Yeah, so I echo Mark's sentiments in that, we have to actively work to get rid of fraudsters because they get smarter every single day in how they go to market. And so we have to be better about how we go to market. And so one of the things that the IAB is doing is that we're actively working to update and create better standards around brand safety and suitability. And that goes from everything to looking at how open RTB works, to creating better taxonomy, and to understanding, just how the bad actors are working and making sure we're leveraging tools that are already in place and improving those tools so they work. One of the big things that IAB Tech Lab is launching, and we're actually launching it next week, it's called the Transparency Center, which it's based on the fundamental purpose is to give buyers and sellers more information on what standards their partners are using. So what kind of standards they've implemented, what kind of compliance programs they're been certified by. And the idea is that the more information that you have about the people that you work with, the better you're able to understand them and protect against potential bad actors. And this really gives all of everyone within the digital ecosystem to have full transparency into what their partners are doing. The second part of your question, in terms of what do I think advertisers and publishers can do to keep the ecosystem free of bad actors? I think they cannot work in silos. So it's important to participate in industry conversations that happen, whether that be at IAB Tech Lab, whether that's connecting with GARM, or whether that's working with companies like Double Verify, their vendors, to articulate their needs so that we're building products that support the ecosystem going forward.
Great. So Lisa, let's connect it back to CTV again. As money pours into the space, are you concerned specifically about increased risk of fraud?
It's a yes and no from me, in that it's a yes, because of course, where money goes, fraud flows, right? And so you see that happen. However, from a perspective of Spark Foundry and Publicis Media and working with partners like Double Verify and others, it's a no, because of the fact that we're putting everything in place to prevent that fraud in the first place, both pre-bid and post-bid, to ensure that we guarantee that quality for our clients. And I think as a general rule of thumb, if you see inventory scaling at pace at a lower CPM, again, it's red flag time, right? It's an alarm bell that if it feels like it's too good to be true, it probably is, right? So I think that in order to get to a cleaner marketplace, it's about how we put all the things that Orchid's talking about in place with GARM, with the IAB, working with partners like yourselves and others to get to a place where it means that, to Mark's point, it is going down. I mean, I want you to catch more things, but I want you to catch it in the pre-bid and make it a cleaner marketplace, period, versus it being something we catch after the fact, right? So the safer the environment, the cleaner the marketplace, the better it is for everybody ultimately, because scaling rubbish is still rubbish. We need to be able to scale quality, because that's what's going to deliver the best return on investment and best brand environments for our clients and our partners.
Scaling rubbish is still rubbish. New tagline, Mark, for DV, maybe? All right, so let's talk viewability and engagement metrics. So first, we're going to launch our second poll, which is to the audience of how much of a role viewability plays in measuring success across digital media campaigns. So to quickly review some of the trends I spoke about earlier, in North America, improvement is still happening, but it has slowed down. After 8% growth last year, this year we saw 5% and 4% increases on display and video, respectively. In LATAM, display viewability is up 9% year over year, and video is up 12% year over year, and both display and video are exceeding that 70% threshold set by the IAB. So Lisa, we'll start with you. Viewability is up, great. But beyond viewability, what role do additional attention metrics play in how an advertiser should optimize their campaigns? And obviously, if you want to talk to any specifics within Spark, that's great. Especially metrics like time in view or audibility, any exposure or engagement indicators that go beyond viewability.
I guess it's a little bit like that old analogy, if a tree falls in the forest, right? If an impression wasn't viewable, was it ever seen or heard, right? And so I go to that. I think from my perspective, when I think about viewable, we used to think that was the great metric. It was the metric that we had, and being viewable meant that we at least had a parameter. Increasingly, it's about all the other metrics we've talked about today in terms of being brand safe, ensuring that it's not fraud, but it's about that engagement level as well. So understanding what percentage was in view, what percentage was audible, how long did people participate or engage with the ad? Did they watch the whole video? Did they see everything? Did they engage with any of the metrics? And I think that, when you start to think about quality, that's one of the metrics in terms of ensuring that we've got all those things in place in terms of the brand safety, the quality, the fraud, and all those things that make up your authenticity metric. However, it's about thinking about how we start to think about what really matters for the business objective. So if the business objective is about engagement and understanding the new brand and connecting that emotional bond, then of course, understanding that someone's seen the whole video is going to be imperative to get that sight, sound, emotional experience. If the objective is more on an acquisition base, then it's about how do we drive to that action more quickly. So it's all in the context of the business impact we want to drive, and therefore how we set out those metrics, and they all play a role.
Yeah, and I'll publish the results here as I punt to Orchid to see if you have anything to add. But as you can see, viewability is playing a huge part in the Americas. 65% of respondents said that it does play a huge part in measuring success of digital media campaigns, and 35% say somewhat, and no one has responded saying not really or not really sure. So clearly it's top of mind for the region. Anything to add onto what Lisa just went through with regards to attention metrics?
Yeah, I would just echo all of Lisa's sentiments, so I won't repeat them because she nailed it on the head. But I would add that it's also for brands to standardize KPIs around metrics specific to their creative. You know, we often forget to understand how important the creative is to the overall viewability experience. A standard video versus an interactive video will function completely different from each other in different types of content. So you really have to take in the category, the layer, how that's working. And logos and call to actions make a difference. If you have a 30-second video and people are only getting watching 15 seconds of that 30 seconds, you want to make sure you get all the important messaging up front in that first 14 seconds. So those things I think you have to take in context. It's not just about the viewability, but it's also about how the creative is impacting that viewability.
And I think that segues really, really well to our next topic, which is about contextual targeting. So, you know, obviously stricter data regulations and the eventual deprecation of third-party cookies have shifted the advertising landscape. We'd be remiss not to cover that today. So Orchid, back to you. Of all the solutions that you've heard being considered to replace these traditional audience solutions, which ones are top of mind with advertisers?
What I find really interesting is how advertisers are really getting smarter about their go-to-market in a world that is no longer as the cookies changes and how we think about how they're going to get closer to their audiences. So I've seen them really embrace 3 types of solutions. So one is really finding partners that have a wealth of first-party data that helps them grow and get closer to their customers. So you see like this huge spike in the use of retail media networks. The other is finding ways to leverage their own first-party data. And so I'm seeing a lot of growth of companies using AI for data enablement and finding new ways to create safe rooms and partnering with people to make sure that they're focused in a consumer-first privacy by design approach. And then the last thing, which I think is most exciting, is how they're embracing the new contextual targeting, right? So contextual is certainly significantly different than when it was first launched eons ago. And this embracing the advances that contextual has in terms of really understanding how their audiences are engaging with their content and how that can help drive ROI for their advertising campaigns.
Yeah, Lisa, on your side, are you seeing that contextual is growing in importance?
Absolutely, and I think everything that Orchid said, and I think that the other thing I would add is there's a couple of things. One is, you know, thinking about vulnerability assessment in terms of, is it really going to impact you? I think, you know, I've got some clients that are freaking out about iOS 15 point whatever we're on now, 15.8, 15.9, and so on. And every time there's something that comes out, there's this kind of like freak out because there's a lot of press around, you know, Google says something, then Apple says something. And so the first thing I always say to my clients is, were you going to advertise there? Were you advertising there? Is it part of your marketing strategy? And if not, then let's relax for a second and take a breath, because we can plan for it, right? The second thing is understanding, you know, and having a first party data strategy, as Orchid mentioned, and thinking about what that looks like for the future and what your value exchange is. And then obviously context plays a massive role, because I love that it's bringing back the nature of art and science of true marketing and what we always did as well as finally the UX. So as you then start to think about your user experience, once they get to you or once they start to be engagement with your brand, what is the experience you're delivering? Because that has a massive impact on how they're going to ultimately engage with your brand or even buy your product.
Yeah. So Mark, what do you think? Is contextual back?
Said it before and I'll say it again. Context is back, baby. It built a $70 billion linear TV business and it's coming home. No, seriously though, I think it's interesting. I think we went so far the other direction for so many years, which was like audience targeting, audience targeting, audience targeting. I don't care where they are. I'm going to sell them a BMW because I know exactly who they are and they're a market for a car. But I think, over the years, what we found is that, yeah, people need to be engaged with content. It needs to be the right environment for them to actually want to, engage with your ad, right? It doesn't always work. It's not always about audience. So I think, we swung so far to the individualized audience-based targeting that this has been a wake-up call to say, you know what, context does matter. Other things, there are other quivers or other arrows in our quiver that we need to be able to use, because it's not just about the who, it's about the what, it's about the where, and it's about the how, right? And I think all of those things come together in context. And the nice thing about context is that this is not the the broad-based contextual targeting of yesterday, which is like, okay, I sell beer, so I want to be on all sports sites, right? That was the way people used to think about it. But now, because we've advanced so much with the semantic science that we have and the ontological expertise of what actually is the page is saying, it's not broad categorizations anymore. It's really, does this content fit the nuance of what the ad needs to be about? And just like brand safety and brand suitability have evolved, contextual targeting has evolved too, because it's that art. It's the art of knowing what those words actually mean, and will those spur, an engagement, right? There could be two articles about the entirely same context, about the same thing, but the tone and spirit of an article, of the context of that page, can drive much higher engagement than another type of tone or experience about the same subject. And I think that's what's exciting about what's been going on today, and even where DV sits. I mean, we've taken all of that data, all those trillions of impressions that we've seen, to help keep people create brand suitability tiers and create that environment around, better define the environment around those ads, and now spin it into helping them create a better understanding of what the context is. And I think that's what's really exciting about what's going on with contextual today.
Awesome. So last question to end this lovely fireside chat. So first, we're going to share our last poll, and that's about trends dominating the next year or so. So curious to hear from the audience, but first I'm going to ask our panelists to put on their prediction hat, I guess. Lisa, let's start with you. What's in your magic 8-ball, right? What do you think the industry is going to evolve in over the coming year? What changes are here to stay? Where do you see growth occurring? What do you think the dominant trend really is that we're going to see over the next 12 months or so?
I was going to talk a little bit about cookie deprecation, and I still think that's super important. We do have an extension, right? We've been given an extension on cookie deprecation, but I don't want us to be fooled into thinking that means that we can wait till the deadline. So I do want us to be out there as clients as well, thinking about how we evolve our strategy to ensure that we do those things I talked about before in terms of the UX, the vulnerability assessment. How does it impact your measurement, for example, and the quality of what you're doing? And the other thing is, it was as I was hearing Mark talk, I got a little bit overexcited because I love behavioral science. It's the nerd in me. So I love understanding how human brains work. And Mark mentioned at the beginning, taking data and humanizing it and understanding it in terms of behavior. I think as we move more towards contextual, as well as those first one-to-one first-party data solutions, there's a combination of the two as we think about behavioral science and how we can leverage those moments of true receptivity and by understanding how people tick.
Yeah, and of course, creative is so important to that, right? As we were all talking about before. Orchid, what do you think? What's the dominant trend that you think will be most important over the next year?
So I think we have to get measurement right. So we have a real opportunity as the cookie goes away because of, everything that's happening within our ecosystem, to really reimagine measurement and not to be so focused on a look back in terms of trying to make it be cross-platform, cross-media, that type of measurement, but really builds measurement for the future of what our industry is, where it's going. So when you think about, you talked about it earlier, the trends in COVID has driven streaming and people to engage with media differently and process media differently. So it's really an opportunity for us to break the wheel and really think about what measurement should be and how it should work and function for the future of what we're going to be versus, what we were before the pandemic. So I'm excited about those conversations.
Great. And Mark, you're going to be able to cheat a little bit because I'm going to share the results of the poll here. But for your answer.
Yeah, no. I'm gonna play off what Orca just said, and I think it's, the next several years are going to be about measurement, but not because where I think people think it is. We saw a massive change in behavior because of COVID, right? Commuting went away. At-home work is here to stay, and how long, we don't know how long it's gonna last, but it's changed behavior forever. What that means is that it's changed the way people have engaged with digital media. It's changed the time frame in which they do. It used to be, okay, this is drive time, so we have their attention in this type of media. Now this is work time, so we have to go for this type of media. And now this is, at home time. That's all over. And because of that, the way we measure is really important. And not just because it's become a different time shift across platform, because the level of engagement has changed. I can guarantee of the 91 participants that are still on the line with us today, they are all multitasking. There are multiple screens going on here. So things like viewability the definition of viewability starts taking on a different meaning when it's really about viewability plus engagement. Right? Where are people really going to be sitting at one screen with nothing else around them? It used to be drive time was great because people had to focus on the road and their ears would be connected to a radio, right? That was how they connected. Now, if drive time goes away and really everything is multi-screen because you're not really in an office anymore where people are looking over your shoulder, right? And making sure you're not looking at stuff. How are we going to make sure that we're actually measuring engagement? I think that is a totally uncharted territory. That things like, understanding how consumer engagement is with digital media and what that really means for advertisers is going to be a real challenge. And I think measurement is going to be the way that we're going to try to tackle that challenge.
Great. Well, the audience is pretty split between continued growth in CTV spend and privacy restrictions being the most dominant. But we can see that we have answers across new and emerging channels as well, increased budgets now coming out of the pandemic into recovery, and, the oldie but goodie brand safety and suitability. So I think we have time for one or two questions. We have a bunch in the Q&A. So Mark, this might be a bit of an easy one for you to answer. So how is adoption and acceptance of DV tags going in CTV and video? We are still not finding many publishers cannot or will not accept tags.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, look, I think we've done a really exceptional job getting to the places where most advertisers want to be. So, Roku and Hulu and Amazon and the buying platforms that plug into them like Trade Desk and Amobi and SpotX and Verizon, et cetera. I think the shorter answer is we've got a lot of coverage. 30% of the video impressions that we're measuring are covered. But the best way, there's no technical reason why a publisher or platform can't use our tags. The best way to incentivize that behavior, if you're an advertiser, is to lean in on them. Because the only reason why a platform would not want to be measured is a business reason, not a technical reason. So if you're an advertiser and you want to feel more comfortable and drive greater transparency in the CTV world, then lean into the publishers that you want to be on to have them accept DV tags or any third-party verification tags. Because if they don't, what are they hiding? That's the only thing I would say.
Yeah. We're a little over time because we had multiple questions. We'll continue for a few minutes. So question number 2 from the audience. Do you think that negative keyword lists are a good brand safety measure, or could they be too restrictive? Lisa, if you're comfortable answering that, or Mark.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's an and, not an or. They're not the sole solution. However, I think we talked a little bit about before in terms of context. and also behavioral science and understanding the linguistics behind it, right? So as Mark said, you could have two different articles that are contextually relevant, written in two very different tones from two very different point of views. They might use the same words, but the combination of the words is what matters, and the tone. And so it needs to be an and versus just a sole solution, in my opinion.
Great, Mark, nothing to add.
Yeah, that nailed it. That was great.
All right, question number 3, and I think that's all we have time for. Is the adoption of Double Verify SDK increasing amongst publishers? If so, by how much? So Orchid, maybe you could speak to open measurement specifically.
Yeah, so open measurement is definitely being adopted. I don't know the percentages off top of my head, but it's definitely being embraced by the industry. We needed a standard. It's a collaborative piece that everyone came together and wrote. Double Verify was certainly an active participant in that conversation and developing that standard. And so I actually encourage everybody who's not using it to use it, because it really does create transparency into our ecosystem.
Yeah, and I'll repeat a stat that I had earlier. It wasn't on a slide, but was a talking point. So in Q1 of this year, we saw over 100,000 OMID-enabled apps for mobile apps specifically, globally. So certainly scale is there, and that's a huge improvement over the years, and it has led to directly more advertisers wanting to track in-app specifically. All right, we are over on time. Huge thanks to Orchid at IAB and Lisa from Spark Foundry. And of course, thank you, Mark, as well, for a fantastic discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. Shameless plug, if you have not read our Global Insights report yet, please download it from our site. I am definitely biased, but it's very interesting and has a lot more insights and data and benchmarks as well for you to use, so check it out. The session is also being recorded, so we will send out the recording as well, so you will have it available for viewing at a later date. And that's all, folks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thanks for joining.